Good morning, class. This is Mr. Burke, and I'm going to do a brief review of the Linux overview and Linux command line lecture presentation. This was given about a week and a half ago. The intent of this recording is to present the material for students who may not have been able to make the class, or for students who want to do a quick review of the class. So let's get started. One thing I am doing, because we have a quiz and we'll have a midterm coming up, and I'm going to highlight on the charts a couple of things that I think you really should study and be prepared to respond to on a quiz or an exam. So the yellow highlights or items I would say take note of. I'll also include those in the study guides for those exams and quizzes. These are the topics we're going to cover today. We'll go quickly through the history, very quickly, and some of the distributions of Linux. Protection rings, we will focus in on specifically the kernel or ring 0. We'll go through some user types, some terms, the file system, permissions, some popular commands, and I'm not going to ask you to memorize too many, but maybe a couple, 8 to 10, and I've highlighted the 8 or 10 that might pop up on a quiz. All right, let's go. What is Linux? It's an open source family of operating systems. It evolved out of the Unix operating system, and it runs on multiple platforms. It does multi-user, multitasking, multiprocessing, 32-bit, 64-bit, but the key takeaways that I want you to have is it's open source. It runs on multiple platforms, and being open source, the source code is made available to the community, to the user community. So it is enhanced by many developers and maintained by many developers, and you have many versions, different versions of Linux that you can run. You probably use it, and you're using it on a number of devices, but you're using it under a different name. We'll talk about that in a second. But the key here is it is powerful, it's free, and essentially Linux runs the internet. The servers behind the scenes that are running the internet, that are running the networks, that are running businesses, are running some version of a Linux operating system. And that's why we want to focus in and become familiar with some of the commands and some of the terms and concepts of Linux. As we said before, it is a family of operating systems. You're probably using different versions under a different name. For example, Android is a child of Linux. iOS, or the Apple operating system, is also a offshoot of Linux. But here are some of the popular names: Ubuntu, CentOS OS, Debian, and so on. So do not be surprised that you've used something and it is part of the Linux family. Protection rings, or Linux security. As an operating system, it has rings of security. The outer ring, or ring 3 in this case, is application functions. That's where the user's interacting with the system, and maybe you're using Microsoft products or web browsing tools and things like that, but the user has some level of authority to customize and change the configuration and to do things at the outer level. What I want to focus in on is ring 0, which is the innermost ring or level of Linux, and that is the kernel. The kernel is the core of the operating system. Those are the trusted elements of the operating system. Users and even administrators cannot change the kernel. That runs those functions that we all trust run reliably and run correctly. The bad guys would love to get into the kernel because they could make 1 plus 1 equal 5. They could do things that would be completely unexpected in a system. So we have to protect the kernel. User types. Don't get bogged down with all the different user types. I want to show you the highest level of a user. This is called the super user or the root user in Linux. Also might be called admin, but this is the authority of the user that has the most privilege within the system or administrative privilege in the system. And typically they can go in and assign, create new users, give those users any kind of privilege other than modifying the kernel. And they also have authority to go look at files, create files, delete files, modify files. So super user or root user has maximum admin authority in the system. What we have to do is protect and prevent what's called privilege escalation, unauthorized privilege escalation. That's where, again, the bad guy wants to come in maybe as a regular user and find a way to escalate their privileges up to super user or root user and not really have the authority to do that. So one exposure we try to prevent against is something called privilege escalation. Okay. Couple of key terms. I'm gonna go through these quickly. In Linux, there's something called the command. That is actually what you type in and it executes a function. We'll go through a whole list of basic commands, but that's what you type in. Where you type that in is the shell. The shell is the command line. That's where you type the command in. The kernel, we just talked about that. That is the core of the operating system. It has maximum authorities in the system and we have to protect it. And then the file system. That's on the next chart, but essentially Linux does have a file system. We use the term directories and files, but directories could also be called folders. In other systems, they call what we call directories folders. All right, let's go to the file system. Key on the file system, it is hierarchical, like a tree. And if you want to get to everything, you have to go to the top of the hierarchy, which is called the root directory, And how you get there, and I'll show you again later, but you change directory to // and that'll take you to root. At root, you have the ability to not only work in that folder, but you can drill down to any folder below it. So if you're doing searches and finds and other commands, by being in root, it allows you to not only look in that folder, but look in all the child folders below it. The other key directory we're going to point out, at least at this time, is the home directory. That's the user's directory. It's assigned, a user directory is assigned to every user that is added to a Linux system. And that's where you keep your files. And that's where you're probably, when you log in, you start in your user folder. And you get to that folder by doing change directory squiggly, change directory as in CD, Charlie David, squiggly line, and the squiggly line is in the upper left corner of your keyboard. A command, this is pretty basic, but the command has a basic nomenclature. There is the command itself. In Linux, most commands are an acronym of 2 characters, 3 characters, maybe 4 or 5 at the most, but they're abbreviated, if you will. So LS in this case means list files. Now in the command, the nomenclature may also include some options. That's the second variable. Here, list files -L means listed in a vertical order. Just want you to become familiar with the command may have multiple parts. Command itself, the options, and it may also have some kind of an argument. For example, what folder am I listing files in? So that's the basic format of the command. You can Google any of these and see what it is and see what all the options are and things of that sort. So I encourage you to use Google or your browser to look these up if you ever get puzzled. File permissions. In Linux, the 3 levels of permission that are authorized are read, write, and execute. And I think those are pretty self-evident. R, W, and X. In the window on this screen, if you look over to the left, you see a dash, RWX, and so on. So those are the read, write, execute authorities that have been given to the owner, to the group, and to anyone else that's in the system. I'll show you a bit more about that later. I also want to point something out real quick. It's not on the quiz, but the first character in a list of authorities is either a dash or a blank, a D as in David, And the D stands for, you're looking at a directory. That row, the bottom row in that example, is a directory. The first 3 rows in that window are all files. So you have a file, and then finally a directory. If this were color-coded, the file names way over to the right, hello, hello.c, hello.s, those would all be white, indicating at least on my system, indicating their files. And then the final one, which is the directory POSIXUFT, that would be in blue. So you'll also see with color coding when you list files, a distinction between files, which will come up in white, and directories, which will be displayed in blue text. Staying with file permissions, I'm really not going to drill down. All I want you to know is the 3 levels, read, write, and execute. But here is a nomenclature that shows, hey, it shows the read, write, execute authority of the owner of the data. The next 3 characters, read, write, execute, would be the group. And the final one would be others. Now, you wouldn't necessarily have all those authorities. For example, the last 3 characters may be dash, 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 which means others have no authority. Can't read it, can't write it, and can't execute the file. Don't get bogged down on this. We'll do examples in some exercises later on where you become more familiar. This will not be on the first quiz or exam. Okay. One thing I do want to show you when you do commands, there's something called piping, where you add multiple commands together. So for example, if we list a file in a vertical order, we may not want to display that on the screen, which is the standard output of any command, is to do whatever you're doing and display the results on the screen, if there are results. In this case, we have the greater than, and that's piping the output of the initial command to an output file. And simply what piping does, and there are a couple of examples, is where we're adding 2 commands together. Not only list the files, but then here, put the file output in an output file. If you see double greater than, that says put the file output in the output file, but append it. Don't erase or replace what's in the original file. So you have 2 examples. Put the file in an output file if a single paren, greater than is this, and replace whatever's in there. There's nothing in there, put this data in there as the original data. And the double greater than is append the data to whatever's in the file. Okay. But that's called piping. And there are a couple of variations of piping. You could do it as output. You could pipe input into a command. And you can just simply, if it was a straight vertical line, you'll see that in a second, we could just join 2 commands together. But on the Linux command line, you'll find over time, it's very efficient to run multiple commands at the same time. So you can filter down your results to something very specific or something that is human readable instead of, screens and screens of output on rows of data on the screen. All right, so we're talking about piping. Here's the standard pipe, which is a vertical line. And that simply says take 1 command and the output of that command, then run the second command on the output of that command. So you're joining 2 commands together. You could have a 3rd command, pipe, another command, and then another pipe. So you can put a string of commands together, join them together by pipes, but it's a quick way to display a file. Then here, grep Netscape, search for the word Netscape. Then we're going to do a word count and see how many rows, in this case, are in the output results of those commands. All right, I'm gonna let you work through this yourself. We have examples in the homework, but here's a list of common commands, and then I highlighted maybe the top 8 to 10 here. The list. You're gonna do this all the time. Wherever you are, you're gonna list what's in that folder or directory, ls. I like to do an ls with a -L to put it in a vertical, but if you do ls alone, it'll list what's in your current directory or folder, but it'll do it horizontally, not vertically. Cat displays the content of the file. So if you want to ever look at a file, do a cat and whatever the name of that file is. Echo, if you want to display some characters on the screen, you do echo and you type the characters in and it'll come up on the screen. Using pipes and other techniques, you could display characters and immediately pipe it into a file. And our homework has examples. So echo is just a quick way to get some data into a file or get data onto the screen. Touch is a quick way to create a file. You touch and you say the file name and it'll create that file. It'll be an empty file, but at least you now have a new file name created. Pipe we talked about on the prior chart was a way to join multiple commands together. So here, the example is cat. We're going to display a file name. Then we want to search on a keyword within that file. And you will only see the results of that search within that file. So we're going to display a file and search the file, those two commands at the same time. I want to make a quick comment here. Sometimes a PowerPoint in this case will automatically capitalize something. Linux commands in general are always lowercase, always lowercase. So if you executed the capital CAT, you probably will get command not found. So I'll correct the chart, but it should always be lowercase when you execute it. All right, we talked about the pipe, we talked about the greater than that says, whatever the command is, take the output and put it in a file name. So we are piping the output using greater than into a file name using the echo greater than file name. Change directory, very important. Wherever you are, you may need to move to another directory, be it up to the root directory or to a peer directory. And by doing the CD and the directory name, it'll move you to that directory. Now, sometimes you'll have to go up to go over. You'll have to just study that on your own. So you sometimes can't immediately move left and right in the directory. You may have to go up and come down to a peer directory. If you type in change directory / it'll take you to the top of the hierarchy immediately. If you type in change directory squiggly line, it'll take you back to your home directory, regardless of where you are in the hierarchy. I'm not going to go through the rest of the commands. You can read those on your own. I will go down to the bottom of the screen, which is the SSH command. And that is a secure connection. That should all be lowercase, but that's a way to log on to another server using a secure or an encrypted link. What's good about doing that with an encrypted link, when you then type your password in, your password is transmitted to that server in an encrypted string of characters. Okay. More commands, we're not going to go through those. I think the comment I would make is, as you do exercises, if you're puzzled or you don't know how to do it, just Google it. How do I create a directory in Linux? How do I delete a directory in Linux? How do I copy a file? How do I determine who I am? So every one of these, you could quickly find the command by doing a Google, and it'll come right up. There are various cheat sheets, and then through repetition, you'll become familiar with, I'll say, the top 20, 25 commands that you're going to use all the time. Okay. All right, we're up to our summary. From a command perspective, these are those commands I've highlighted in yellow. I'd say be familiar with. Fair game that I may quiz you on it. I would like you to know all the commands on this page, but focus in your studies on the ones in yellow. Now there's homework that has been given. We have an exercise, JS Linux exercise that you can go through. I think touches just about every one of the commands here. We also have another exercise that is on hold because the Howard network is preventing us from doing an SSH, a secure connection from within the building. We'll find a way and put this homework out. This will be homework number 7, but it has not been assigned yet. And then there's some resources. As we said before, Linux is free. We are using the JS Linux. It's a web-based in the browser way to get to Linux. It's quick, it's easy, it's free. So every one of us should already have our IDs on that JS Linux, otherwise known as vfsync.org. There's Kali Linux. Kali Linux is a prepackaged version of Linux that has a bunch of cybersecurity types tools. You can run that in a virtual machine or virtual box right on your workstation. We're also looking at giving you access to that in AWS #3 in a cloud version of Kali Linux. So not only can you get to a Linux distribution, but it'll have a bunch of tools already preloaded. These are open source tools, preloaded, so you can do exercises and challenges. We, as part of the class, we're going to use a number of training and challenge portals. Try Hack Me, Over the Wire, Pico CTF, and we're soon to get on something called Cyber Skyline. That's the National Cyber League. So all of those are portals. I think they're a lot of fun, lots of challenges that we can get into, and many of them will have a Linux terminal embedded right in the portal. So within your browser, without installing additional software, the terminal or the command line you need to execute commands will be right there in the browser. And that's it. There are other ways to install Linux native. The comment I'll make right here is I don't want to require or even suggest you have to install software on your own laptop or machine. That has to be your choice. Eventually, if you're going to really get into cyber, you're probably going to create your own personal lab on your machine, but everybody's machine's a little different. What installs easily on mine may not install easily on yours, and so on. So we want you to research what you're installing very carefully, take your time, and have plenty of time to test it out. So for this class, we'll provide options that will not require you to install much software. There may be a few things you just have to install, and we expect those will be safe items, very safe. All right, with that, we are done with the lecture. If you have questions, contact me, or let's get some office hours, or email or text, and we'll get you moving. Thank you, and I'll see you on the next video.